16-year-old Aiden Fucci has now been found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for stabbing 13-year-old TristynBailey 114 times. In the area of these Florida prisons where young inmates such as Fucci are housed, many reports have surfaced of the brutal tests of heart that these young inmates must go through once they arrive there. Such as this one that says, "It's a vicious initiation that welcomes young newcomers into the violent den of this state's youthful offender prisons. In the test's wake, young men have been left horribly injured and permanently disfigured. Newcomer who endures the beatings and sometimes the R word that I cannot say on YouTube doesn't have to pay at the commissary for his future protection from mistreatment and the R word. Those who prove unable to endure are targeted for future abuses." With that being said, I like to speak candidly when I'm really giving these breakdowns of what are the chances of survival for an inmate and what would their experience be, most likely. If you don't know, I myself have already spent 10 years inside a state prison system in South Carolina, and I can tell you now what they're saying about these youthful offender, these young inmate areas of prison. They also have something like that in my state prison system. I think it's a pretty common thing when you're in a certain age range. Even if you've been tried as an adult, even if you're in adult prison, they'll usually have a specific dorm for a certain age range, maybe 16, 17 to 21 or so. A lot of people don't realize these can be some of the most dangerous areas of the prison. I mean, in comparison to, yes, where you have grown men, the grown inmates in their 30s, 40s, 50s, yes, a lot of violence happens. A lot of danger is present. But you have a bit more maturity compared to a dorm, a cell block full of young, hyper energetic, youthful inmates who, such as Aiden, who just received a life sentence. And let me tell you that things like a life sentence, 10, 15, 20 years, those change you. It changes your mentality, and it changes your personality, and it changes who you are almost just at your core. So the environment that you're left with, it has all the danger and violence and the risks of the regular parts of the prison with the older inmates, but it's now mixed with just that youthful boredom, mischievousness, the need to just get into some trouble, cause some trouble because there's simply nothing better to do. The hazing, the bullying, the initiations like they talked about. And I think Aiden Fucci is going to find himself in a very, very shockingly rough new world. But also, I think the young guys, if he's surrounded by these youthful inmates, are not as likely to maybe be emotionally fired up and triggered and really angered by what exactly he did. Is his crime and who he did it to going to make a difference to these young guys? I don't think so, as much as it would to the older inmates. I think with the older inmates, you're going to have a lot. I've spoke about this when talking about Brian Koberger. I think it strikes a chord with these older guys who you have a lot of fathers, a lot of uncles, a lot of grandfathers who probably have young women, young nieces, young daughters, granddaughters in their life. Who, it's probably bad relationships on their end because of the situation they got themselves into. They don't have very strong relationships with these young girls in their life, and they may feel guilt. It makes them angry. There's hurt. There's pain there internally. And I think that could really fire up some of the older guys, and a lot of these older guys are probably going to be 2-3 times Aiden Fucci's size and probably every bit as willing to use a knife as Aiden is. And I think we could see somebody really do something pretty bad to Aiden if and when he gets around these older guys. Now, for his time around these younger inmates, again, back to that, for what he did specifically, I don't think that's going to be what causes him a lot of problems, if I'm being honest. I know who he did it to. They know who he did it to. But still, the willingness to use a knife when a knife is the weapon of weapons in prison. Your willingness to use it when there's very many inmates who aren't willing to use it. I think it's obvious you will. That's going to play a part in it. No matter who his victim was and how cowardly it was of him to do that, he's willing to use a knife, and that counts for something back there. When inmates are sizing up another inmate, it matters. Also, I think there's a factor there, just the fact that it was 114 times he stabbed this victim. I know how inmates' minds work. I know the kind of things they really take into consideration. I think the sheer number of times that knife was used, they're going to assume that he's pretty crazy. He has a crazy side to him, and that's always something to be wary of. That's always something they look out for. That doesn't mean he's not, nobody's going to mess with him. I'm just saying it will be accounted for, and it will be taken into consideration. Now, a lot of these younger guys, I don't think that will affect how they treat him and approach him as much as it would maybe even if this was a grown man around other grown men, because the young guys, whether you used it or not, how many times you used it, whether you will use that knife, these young guys really have something to prove, and they really want to prove that they don't care about any of that. And if it comes down to it, they'll test you, and they'll pull your card and say, hey, let's see how many times you do it to me. So based on that, and based on the reports here of just the environment, the hazing, the things they do to these guys, especially the newcomers coming in, which, Aiden Fucci is not used to this new world at all. I think he's definitely going to have his fair share of rough times. How many rough times and how long those last throughout his life sentence, again, as with any person, it's all going to come down to how he specifically conducts himself. I don't think it's so much going to be what he did and who he did it to. It's all going to be about how he conducts himself and his personality, his social skills. Is he going to learn to adapt and socialize and move correctly throughout this new prison environment? That's my 2 cents. That's my insight. Hope it helped you a little. And let me know what you think. Given this new information, what do you think it's going to be like for him? Let me know in the comments. And please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because I will be back soon with another video.